While a veteran was recovering at a remote ranch, a wild Mustang mare approached him and pushed her foal toward him. The shocked man was frozen with disbelief at first, but when he understood what was happening, he did something incredible. Michael Harrington had never imagined that his path to healing would lead him to the vast, untamed wilderness of Nevada's high desert. The rolling, sage-covered hills that stretched toward distant mountains had initially felt alien to him. Nothing like the dense pine forests of his native Oregon or the arid landscapes of Afghanistan, where he had served 3 grueling tours. But now, 6 months into his stay at Horizon's Edge Ranch, a rehabilitation center for veterans suffering from PTSD, the desert had begun to feel like a sanctuary. The morning air carried a crisp bite as Michael stepped onto the wooden porch of his modest cabin. The sky was painted in breathtaking shades of pink and orange, the kind of sunrise that still managed to stop him in his tracks, despite having witnessed it nearly every day since his arrival. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring the warmth that spread through his chest. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the center's lead therapist, had encouraged him to practice these moments of mindfulness, to fully inhabit the present rather than being dragged back into the shadows of his past. "One day at a time, Mike," he murmured to himself, repeating the mantra that had become his lifeline when the memories threatened to overwhelm him. Today marked a significant milestone in his recovery program. For the first time, he would be venturing out alone into the preserve that surrounded the ranch. The 5,000-acre conservation area served as a sanctuary, not just for veterans like Michael, but also for one of America's most iconic symbols of freedom, the wild Mustangs. These horses, descendants of those brought by Spanish conquistadors centuries ago, roamed the landscape in small bands, embodying a resilience and wildness that many of the veterans at Horizon's Edge found deeply resonant with their own experiences. The therapeutic program had been carefully designed to gradually introduce the veterans to increasing levels of independence in nature. First came the group hikes, then paired excursions, and finally, for those deemed ready, solo expeditions. Michael had been both anticipating and dreading this moment. The solitude promised peace, but also threatened to leave him vulnerable to the invasive memories that had haunted him since his medical discharge 2 years ago. After breakfast in the communal dining hall, Michael met with Elena for a final briefing. Her dark eyes, always keen and observant, studied his face as she handed him a topographical map of the area. "Remember what we discussed, Michael. This isn't about pushing yourself to some arbitrary limit. It's about reconnecting with nature and with yourself," she said, her voice carrying the soft lilt of her Chilean heritage. Michael nodded, his fingers tracing the contours on the map. "4 hours, no more. I'll stick to the Eastern Ridge Trail and be back by noon," he confirmed. Elena smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "The satellite phone is fully charged, and remember, this is a victory already, regardless of how far you go. Just being willing to step out there alone shows how far you've come." He tucked the phone into the side pocket of his backpack, along with a first aid kit, water bottles, and a lunch packed by Rosa, the ranch's motherly cook who insisted on feeding everyone as if they were competing in an Olympic event. The weight of the pack against his back felt reassuring, a tangible connection to safety, even as he prepared to venture into uncertainty. The Eastern Trail began just beyond the paddocks, where some of the ranch's therapy horses were already basking in the morning sun. Unlike the wild Mustangs, these horses had been specially trained to work with traumatized veterans, their calm demeanors and intuitive responses making them ideal partners in the healing process. Michael paused to greet Sergeant, a sturdy buckskin, gelding with whom he had formed a particular bond during his equine therapy sessions. "Keep an eye on the place while I'm gone, will ya?" he said softly, reaching over the fence to stroke the horse's velvet muzzle. Sergeant nickered in response, his ears pricked forward in what Michael had come to recognize as the horse's expression of attentiveness. The trail began gently enough, winding through scrubby juniper and occasional stands of aspen. Michael's boots crunched on the mixture of sand and small rocks that covered the path. He found himself settling into a rhythm, his breathing synchronizing with his steps. The backpack, which had initially felt like a burdensome reminder of the weight he carried inside, gradually became just another part of his movement, neither heavy nor light, simply present. As the trail climbed toward the ridge, the landscape opened up around him. To the west lay Horizon's Edge, its collection of wooden buildings now appearing as tiny structures against the immensity of the desert. To the east stretched the true wilderness of the preserve, a patchwork of sage-covered plateaus, rocky outcroppings, and hidden valleys where the wild horses made their home. Michael paused at a flat boulder that jutted out from the ridge, creating a natural lookout point. He unscrewed the cap of his water bottle and took a long drink, scanning the horizon. In the distance, he could make out movement. A small band of wild mustangs grazing on a plateau. Even from this distance, their presence emanated a powerful sense of freedom that made something stir in his chest. The therapists at Horizon's Edge often spoke about the parallels between these wild horses and the veterans they treated. Both had experienced trauma. The horses through the brutal helicopter roundups that had decimated many herds, and the veterans through the horrors of combat. Both were survivors learning to trust again, to find their place in a world that sometimes seemed to have no space for their wildness. Michael knew his own struggles with reintegration all too well. After his third tour, the nightmares had become unbearable. Vivid replays of the IED explosion that had taken two of his closest friends and left him with both physical and invisible scars. Civilian life had felt like an ill-fitting suit, constrictive and foreign. He had retreated further into isolation, pushing away friends and family until a particularly severe panic attack in a grocery store had finally led to his admission at Horizon's Edge. The sun had climbed higher now, warming his back as he continued along the ridge. The trail began to descend into one of the preserve's many valleys, this one containing a natural spring that sustained a lush pocket of vegetation amid the arid landscape. According to the map, this was Wolf Creek Valley, named not for any actual wolves. They had been eradicated from this region long ago, but for the shape of the rocky formation that overlooked the spring. As Michael picked his way down the slope, he felt a sense of accomplishment washing over him. 6 months ago, the thought of being alone in this wilderness would have triggered intense anxiety. Now, while not completely at ease, he could appreciate the solitude, the distant call of a red-tailed hawk circling above, the whisper of the breeze through the sage. The spring came into view as he rounded a bend in the trail, a pool of startlingly clear water surrounded by lush grasses and willows, a verdant oasis in the desert. Michael checked his watch. He had been hiking for just over an hour and a half, which left him plenty of time to rest here before beginning the return journey. He found a smooth boulder beside the spring and sat down, shrugging off his backpack. As he unwrapped one of Rosa's enormous sandwiches, a movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention. Instinctively, he froze, a reaction honed by years in combat zones where sudden movements often signaled danger. Slowly, he turned his head toward the source. Emerging from behind a cluster of willows on the opposite side of the spring was a Mustang mare. Her coat was a rich bay, gleaming copper in the sunlight, with a black mane that fell in tangled waves down her neck. She moved with the distinctive caution of a wild thing, each step deliberate as she approached the water. But what made Michael's Breath catch in his throat was the small figure that followed close behind her, a foal no more than a few months old, with spindly legs and a coat so dark it appeared almost black in the shadows. Michael remained perfectly still, sandwich forgotten, in his hand. He had been briefed extensively on how to behave if he encountered the wild horses. Maintain distance, make no sudden movements, never attempt to approach them. The wild Mustangs were not accustomed to human interaction, and while they generally avoided people, a mare with a foal could be unpredictable if she perceived a threat. The mare reached the water's edge, her nostrils flaring as she tested the air. Then, seemingly satisfied that the area was safe, she lowered her head to drink. The foal mimicked its mother, though it seemed more interested in splashing its hoof in the shallow edge than in actually drinking. For several minutes, Michael remained motionless, barely breathing, as he watched the intimate scene unfold. There was something profoundly healing about witnessing these wild creatures in their natural environment, unaware or perhaps simply unconcerned with his presence. For a moment, the weight of his past seemed to lift, replaced by a simple appreciation. For the present moment, exactly what Elena had been encouraging him to find. Then, with startling abruptness, the idyllic scene shattered. The mare's head jerked up, ears swiveling sharply towards something beyond Michael's line of sight. A high-pitched whinny, a sound of distress, escaped her as she backed away from the water. The foal, sensing its mother's alarm, pressed close. To her side, its young body trembling visibly even from Michael's distance. Michael's hand instinctively moved toward the satellite phone in his backpack. Something was wrong. The mare's behavior had shifted from cautious peace to evident fear. In an instant, his years in Afghanistan had taught him to recognize the signs of imminent danger, and every instinct now screamed that these horses were threatened. He scanned the periphery of the spring, searching for whatever had triggered the mare's alarm. At first, he saw nothing unusual among the rocks and vegetation. Then a flash of movement drew his eye to a narrow gully that fed into the valley, and his blood ran cold. 3 figures on horseback were making their way down the gully, moving with purposeful speed. Even from this distance, Michael could see that these were not rangers from the preserve or staff from Horizon's Edge. Something about their furtive approach and the equipment strapped to their mounts triggered his combat-honed threat assessment. These were Mustang trappers, poachers who captured wild horses to sell to slaughterhouses across the border, a practice that was as illegal as it was brutal. The mare was now in full panic, circling in apparent indecision as the riders drew closer. The foal, confused by its mother's distress, whinnied pitifully. Michael knew he needed to alert the authorities immediately, but before he could reach for the phone, the situation escalated dramatically. The mare suddenly bolted, not away from the approaching riders as Michael would have expected, but directly toward him, covering the distance between them with shocking speed. The foal struggled to keep pace on its gangly legs, nearly stumbling in its haste to follow its mother. Michael rose to his feet, uncertain whether to retreat or hold his ground. Everything he had been taught about wild horse encounters warned against being caught between a frightened mare and her foal. Yet something in the mare's desperate approach seemed almost deliberate, as if she were making a choice rather than simply fleeing in blind panic. Then, just yards from where Michael stood, the mare did something that defied all natural behavior. She stopped abruptly and with a nudge of her muzzle pushed her foal forward toward Michael. The small black horse stumbled forward, its dark eyes wide with confusion and fear, now standing directly between Michael and its mother. Michael remained frozen, his mind struggling to process what was happening. The mare took several steps back, her eyes never leaving Michael and her foal. Then, as the sounds of the approaching riders grew louder, she did something that would haunt Michael for years to come. She reared slightly, shaking her head in what appeared to be profound distress, and from her eyes, eyes that reflected an intelligence and emotion he would never have attributed to a wild animal before this moment, streamed what could only be described as tears. In that moment, time seemed to stand still for Michael. The mare's tears, something he would have dismissed as anthropomorphizing had anyone described it to him before, broke through his shock and triggered something deep within him. This wasn't just an animal's fear response. It was a mother's desperate plea for help. She was entrusting her most precious possession to a strange human because somehow, against all natural instinct, she had determined he was the foal's best chance for survival. Michael made his decision in an instant. Years of military training had taught him to assess situations rapidly and act decisively. The approaching riders were minutes away. The mare, despite her evident distress, was clearly mobile and uninjured. The foal, however, standing trembling between them, would be the trapper's primary target. Young horses were more adaptable and therefore more valuable. "I understand," he whispered, the words emerging unbidden as he slowly knelt to appear less threatening to the frightened foal. "I'll protect your baby." As if comprehending his promise, the mare took several more steps backward, still facing them. Then, with a final piercing glance at her foal, she wheeled around and bolted in the opposite direction from the approaching riders. Drawing them away, Michael realized, with a jolt of admiration. She was creating a diversion, sacrificing her own freedom to give her foal a chance. The foal whinnied desperately, attempting to follow its mother, but Michael was faster. With gentle but firm hands, he caught hold of the youngster, wincing as its spindly legs kicked out in panic. The military-grade backpack he wore absorbed most of the blows as he pulled the foal close, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Easy now. Little one, easy. Your mama's trying to save you. I'm going to help, but you need to trust me." The foal's struggles gradually subsided. Not out of trust, Michael suspected, but from sheer terror at being restrained by a human. Its heart raced against his hands, the rhythm frantic and irregular. He needed to move quickly, both to honor the mare's sacrifice and to ensure the foal's safety. Scanning his surroundings, Michael spotted a dense thicket of juniper and sage that grew along one side of the spring. It wasn't ideal, but it might provide enough cover until the immediate danger passed. With one arm securely around the foal's neck and the other supporting its hindquarters, he half-carried, half-guided the young horse toward the vegetation. The foal, surprisingly, didn't resist further. Its legs trembled violently, but it moved alongside Michael as if understanding the need for stealth. Together, they reached the thicket, and Michael helped the foal duck beneath the low-hanging branches. He followed immediately after, ignoring the scratch of twigs against his exposed skin. The natural hollow within the thicket was cramped, but effectively hidden from casual observation. Michael positioned himself so that the foal was between him and the dense foliage, creating a protective barrier between the young animal and any potential threat from the direction of the spring. Then he reached slowly into his backpack, careful not to make sudden movements that might startle the traumatized foal. His fingers closed around the satellite phone, and he withdrew it with practiced care. The device represented their best hope. If he could alert the ranch or the preserve rangers in time, but as he prepared to power it on, the sounds of riders approaching the spring gave him pause. Any noise, even the soft chime of the phone activating, might betray their hiding place. Michael froze, one hand resting protectively on the foal's trembling flank. Through gaps in the foliage, he could now see 3 men on horseback circling the spring. Their mounts were trail horses, sturdy and placid, nothing like the magnificent wildness of the Mustangs they hunted. The men themselves looked weathered and rough, dressed in practical riding gear that had seen better days. They carried lassos and what appeared to be tranquilizer guns, standard equipment for illegal Mustang trappers. "Where'd they go?" the tallest rider demanded, scanning the area with evident frustration. "I swear I saw a mare and foal here not 2 minutes ago." "Mare bolted that way," another replied, gesturing in the direction Michael had seen the mother flee. "But the foal was definitely here too. They don't separate easily." The third man, heavy-set with a beard that covered most of his face, dismounted and began examining the ground around the spring. Michael held his breath as the man stooped to study the very spot where he had first encountered the mare and foal. "Someone else was here," the bearded man announced, pointing to Michael's boot prints in the soft earth beside the spring. "Recently too," the tall rider cursed. "Probably one of those therapy vets from that fancy ranch. Last thing we need is witnesses. We need to move fast," the second man urged. "Mare's the priority, good breeding age, and she's already proven fertile. Foal's a bonus if we can find it, but let's not waste time. We've got other sections to sweep before sundown." The bearded man hesitated, still studying the ground with a tracker's intensity. "Prints lead that way," he said, pointing in the direction of the ridge trail, the opposite direction from where Michael and the foal were hidden. For a tense moment, Michael thought the man might continue tracking, but the lure of the mare proved stronger. The bearded man remounted, and with a final sweeping glance around the spring, the three riders urged their horses in the direction. The mare had fled. Michael waited until the sounds of hoofbeats had faded completely before allowing himself to exhale fully. Beside him, the foal had gone eerily still during the trapper's presence, as if instinctively understanding the need for absolute silence. Now, as the immediate danger receded, it began to tremble again, a soft, distressed nickering escaping its throat. "Your mom's smart," Michael whispered, gently stroking the foal's neck. "She led them away from you, but they're after her now, and we need to get help quickly." He powered on the satellite phone, the soft electronic chime seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet that had descended over the spring. The device connected quickly, and Michael punched in the emergency code for the ranch rather than the regular contact number. This would trigger an alert protocol, ensuring the fastest possible response. Elena answered almost immediately, her voice sharp with professional concern. "Michael, what's happening?" In terse, efficient sentences, a habit from his military days, Michael explained the situation, the mare, the foal, the trappers, and their current position. Elena's response was equally concise and decisive. "Stay where you are. Protect the foal. Ranch security is deploying now, and I'm contacting the preserve rangers. They'll coordinate to intercept the trappers. These men are dangerous, Michael. Do not engage." "Understood," he replied, though something inside him chafed at the instruction to remain passive while the mare was being hunted. But Elena, the mother, she deliberately brought her foal to me. She trusted me with her baby. "I can't just—" "I know," Elena interrupted, her voice softening with understanding. "And that trust wasn't misplaced. The best thing you can do for the mare right now is exactly what you're doing. Keeping her foal safe. The rangers know these mountains better than anyone. If she can be saved, they'll find her." The call ended with a promise that help would reach Michael's position within 30 minutes. Elena's final instructions were to remain hidden with the foal until ranch security arrived, as the trappers might return to search more thoroughly for the young horse. As Michael tucked the phone back into his pack, he turned his full attention to his unexpected charge. The foal's initial shock seemed to be wearing off, replaced by a restless anxiety that manifested in attempts to rise and pace within the confined space of their hiding place. Each movement risked exposing their position through the rustling of foliage, and Michael realized he needed to find a way to calm the distressed animal. Drawing on techniques he had learned during equine therapy sessions at the ranch, Michael began to regulate his own breathing, slow, deep, and audible. Horses were remarkably sensitive to human emotional states, and even this wild foal might respond to deliberate calmness. He kept one hand on the foal's neck, maintaining gentle but consistent contact. "Your mom's going to be okay," he murmured, not caring how foolish it might seem to speak to the animal as if it could understand. The tone mattered more than the words anyway. "She's wild and smart and fast, and we're going to get you back to—" I promise." Gradually, the foal's frantic movements subsided. Whether responding to Michael's calming influence or simply exhausted from fear, it settled onto the ground, tucking its spindly legs beneath its body. Its ears continued to flick anxiously in all directions, monitoring every sound, but its breathing steadied. For the first time since the encounter began, Michael had a chance to really look at the foal. It was smaller than he had initially thought, perhaps only a few weeks old rather than months. Its coat, which had appeared solid black from a distance, revealed subtle dark bay undertones in the dappled light filtering through the juniper branches. A male, he noted, with a small white star between his eyes like a mark of distinction. "You're going to be quite the stallion someday," Michael whispered, carefully brushing a twig from the foal's forelock. "If we can get you safely back to your band." The foal's eyes, liquid brown and framed by impossibly long lashes, regarded him with what Michael could only interpret as cautious assessment. There was intelligence in that gaze, not the reasoned thinking of humans, but something equally profound in its instinctual awareness. Time passed slowly in their hidden sanctuary. Michael found himself slipping into the mindfulness techniques Elena had taught him, focusing entirely on the present moment. The texture of the foal's coat beneath his palm, the complex tapestry of desert scents, the play of light through the juniper branches. His hypervigilance, usually a burden left by combat experiences, now served a protective purpose, every sense attuned to potential threats. When he heard the approach of vehicles, Michael tensed automatically. The foal, sensing his alarm, scrambled to its feet with a soft whinny of distress. Michael placed a steadying hand on its shoulder, straining to identify the newcomers before revealing their position. The distinctive rumble of the ranch's ATVs was immediately recognizable, followed by the crackle of radios, too overt to be the trappers returning. Still, Michael waited until he heard Elena's voice calling his name before responding. "Over here," he called, his voice hoarse from extended silence. In the junipers by the west side of the spring, the relief on Elena's face as she pushed through the foliage to find them was palpable. Behind her stood two members of the ranch's security team, both former military like Michael, and a uniformed preserve ranger whom Michael recognized from orientation sessions. "You're okay," Elena breathed, her eyes quickly scanning him for injuries before turning to the foal. "And you managed to keep him calm. That's remarkable, Michael." The foal pressed against Michael's side as the newcomers entered its field of vision, its slender legs trembling with renewed fear. Michael found himself automatically placing his body between the young horse and the perceived threat, one hand still maintaining that reassuring contact. "The trappers?" he asked, his thoughts immediately returning to the mare. The ranger stepped forward, her weathered face set in grim lines. "We intercepted their vehicles at the northern boundary. They'd already captured a mare, bay with black. Points matches your description. We've made arrests and she's been secured, but what?" Michael demanded, a cold knot forming in his stomach at the woman's hesitation. "She's injured," the ranger admitted. "They used a tranquilizer dart and she fell badly during capture. Our vet is with her now, but the situation is touch and go. We've set up a field treatment station about 2 miles from here." The foal, as if understanding their conversation, suddenly became more agitated, pushing against Michael with increasing urgency. Elena watched this interaction with professional interest, her therapist's mind clearly noting the connection that had formed so rapidly between man and animal. "What are the protocols here?" Michael asked, addressing both Elena and the ranger. "For the foal, I mean. Will he be released to another band, or—" The ranger's expression softened with compassion. Normally, we'd try to reunite him with his mother once she's stabilized. If that's not possible..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Orphaned foals rarely survived in the wild. "That's not an option," Michael stated flatly, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "His mother trusted me with him. I'm not going to let him down." Elena and the ranger exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then Elena nodded slightly, a decision apparently reached. "Let's focus on getting you both to the field station," she said pragmatically, "one step at a time. The foal seems to trust you, which gives us options we wouldn't otherwise have." The process of extracting themselves from the thicket proved challenging. The foal, disoriented and frightened by the presence of strangers, resisted leaving the relative security of their hiding place. It was only when Michael himself exited first, then called softly to the young horse, that it finally ventured out, staying pressed close to his side like a shadow. "Remarkable," the ranger murmured, observing their interaction with evident fascination. "I've worked with Mustangs for 15 years, and I've never seen a wild foal bond with a human this quickly. It's as if he imprinted on you." Michael didn't respond, too focused on maintaining the foal's fragile trust as they began the journey toward the field station where its mother was fighting for her life. With each step, his resolve strengthened. Whatever happened next, he would honor the trust that had been placed in him by a desperate mother in an impossible situation. He had been unable to save his friends in Afghanistan. That burden of failure would always be with him. But this unexpected responsibility thrust upon him by the wild felt strangely like a chance at redemption. And he was determined not to fail. The journey to the field treatment station was slow and cautious. The security team had brought an ATV, but the ranger quickly vetoed using it to transport the foal. The noise and vibration would further traumatize the young horse, potentially shattering the fragile trust he had formed with Michael. Instead, they proceeded on foot, the foal staying so close to Michael that he occasionally had to adjust his stride to avoid the animal's slender legs. Elena walked beside them, maintaining a respectful distance that didn't threaten the foal, while allowing her to observe the unusual bond that had formed. The security team fanned out around them, alert for any sign that the trappers might have returned or brought reinforcements. "Have you thought about what you'll do if the mare doesn't make it?" Elena asked quietly, her words pitched to reach Michael's ears alone. Michael's jaw tightened. "She'll make it," he said with a conviction he didn't entirely feel. "She has to." Elena didn't press the point, but Michael could feel her clinical gaze assessing his emotional state. He knew what she was thinking, that he was forming an unhealthy attachment, projecting his own trauma onto this situation. Perhaps she was right, but in this moment, with the foal's trust literally leaning against him, intellectual analysis seemed less important than the raw instinct to protect. The field station came into view as they crested a gentle rise. 2 large canvas tents set up in a natural clearing, surrounded by vehicles bearing the insignia of the National Wildlife Preserve. Park rangers moved efficiently between the structures, their faces serious and focused. Near the entrance to the larger tent stood a slender woman in khaki, a stethoscope around her neck, marking her as the veterinarian. Michael felt the foal tense. Beside him, its nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scents and sights. He placed a steadying hand on its neck, feeling the racing pulse beneath his fingers. "His mother's in there," he murmured. "We're going to find her." The foal's ears pricked forward at the word mother, as if he understood. Perhaps he did, Michael reflected. The most fundamental instinct of any young creature was the connection to its parent. Whatever else was happening, the foal undoubtedly recognized his scent. The veterinarian spotted their approach and stepped forward to meet them, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of a wild Mustang foal walking willingly beside a human. Like Elena, she maintained a careful distance, respecting the animal's space. Dr. Sarah Littlefield, she introduced herself, addressing Michael directly. "You must be the veteran who found them. Remarkable that you've managed to keep the foal." "Come, how's the mare?" Michael asked, bypassing pleasantries in his urgency. Dr. Littlefield's expression grew solemn. "She's alive, but her condition is critical. The tranquilizer they used was a black market product, much stronger than what we use for legitimate wildlife management. Combined with the fall she took, there's significant internal bleeding and a fracture to her right foreleg." Michael felt his heart sink. Even to his untrained ear, the prognosis sounded dire. Wild horses with broken legs rarely survived, and those that did were often never strong enough to return to their bands. "Can I see her?" he asked. Then, correcting himself, "Can we see her? I think the foal needs to know his mother is alive." The veterinarian exchanged a quick glance with the ranger who had accompanied them from the spring, then nodded. Briefly, she's heavily sedated, but having her foal nearby might actually be beneficial. Just be prepared, it's not a pretty sight. With gentle urging, Michael guided the foal toward the main tent. At the entrance, the young horse balked, nostrils flaring at the antiseptic smell that emanated from within. Michael knelt beside him, bringing himself to eye level with the frightened animal. "I know it's scary," he said softly, "but your mom needs you. You can do this." Whether responding to the tone or some deeper understanding, the foal took a tentative step forward, then another. Michael stayed at his side as they entered the dim interior of the medical tent. The mare lay on a large tarp spread across the ground, her massive form unnaturally still. Fluid dripped from IV bags suspended from the tent's frame, disappearing into catheters inserted into her neck. Her right foreleg was surrounded by a temporary stabilizing cast, and various monitoring equipment beeped softly in the background. Two assistants worked quietly around her, checking readings and adjusting equipment. At the sight of his mother, the foal froze. A tremor ran through his slender body, and a soft, questioning nicker escaped his throat. The mare's ear twitched at the sound, but her eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow and labored. "Talk to her," Dr. Littlefield encouraged from behind them. "She's sedated, not unconscious. She might recognize your voice from earlier." Michael hesitated, feeling suddenly self-conscious. But the foal was looking up at him with those liquid brown eyes, as if waiting for guidance. He cleared his throat and moved closer to the mare's head, the foal staying pressed against his leg. "Hey there," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You did good. Your baby's safe. He's right here with me, just like you wanted." At the sound of his voice, the mare's eyelids fluttered. One eye opened partially, revealing a sliver of the same dark brown as her foal's. Recognition seemed to flicker there, not of Michael specifically perhaps, but of the presence of her offspring. Her nostrils flared slightly, drawing in the scent. The foal strained forward, eager to reach his mother, but clearly intimidated by the strange environment and equipment. Michael gently guided him closer, ensuring he avoided the IV lines. With a soft whinny, the foal stretched his neck to nuzzle his mother's cheek. The mare's eye opened wider, fixing momentarily on her baby before sliding closed again. The effort of consciousness apparently too great to maintain. "That's good," Dr. Littlefield said quietly. "Very good. She knows he's here and safe. That might give her more reason to fight." "What are her chances?" Michael asked, his voice low so as not to disturb the momentary peace that had settled over the reunion. The veterinarian's hesitation spoke volumes. "The next 12 hours will be critical. If she makes it through the night, her odds improve significantly. The internal bleeding appears to be slowing, but the leg is a more complex issue. Even if she survives, she may never run free again." The implications of those words hung heavy in the tent. A Mustang that couldn't run was no longer truly wild, no longer truly free. It was a devastating thought. And if she doesn't make it, Michael forced himself to ask the question that had been haunting him since they'd first heard of the mare's injuries. Dr. Littlefield's expression softened with compassion. Orphaned foals this young rarely survive if returned to the wild. Without a mare to nurse from and protect them, they're extremely vulnerable. In cases like this, we sometimes attempt to place them with appropriate sanctuaries or adoption programs. But what? Michael prompted when she trailed off. But this foal has already formed an unusual attachment to you, she explained. Transferring that bond to another caretaker could be traumatic at this stage, and yet the preserve has strict protocols about wildlife rehabilitation. It's complicated. Michael looked down at the foal, who had settled into a tense vigil beside his mother, his slender legs tucked beneath him on the tarp. The young horse's eyes never left the mare's face, as if by the power of his gaze alone he could will her to heal. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it, Michael said firmly. For now, I'm staying with them both. Dr. Littlefield nodded, seemingly unsurprised by his decision. I thought you might say that. There's a smaller tent set up next door for the response team to rest in shifts. You're welcome to use it, though I suspect you won't want to leave them. I won't, Michael confirmed. But I should let Elena know. She'll worry if I don't check in. As if summoned by her name, Elena appeared at the tent entrance, her silhouette backlit by the late afternoon sun. Her gaze took in the scene. The critically injured mare, the vigilant foal, and Michael standing protectively over them both. I've spoken with Dr. Bennett back at the ranch, she said, stepping inside. He's approved an extended absence for your therapy schedule, provided we maintain daily check-ins. A small smile touched her lips. He seemed to think this situation might be therapeutic in its own right. Relief washed over Michael. He hadn't even considered the implications of missing his structured therapy sessions at the ranch. But of course, that would have been the next logical concern. Elena, as always, was several steps ahead. Thank you, he said simply. I'll have your essentials brought over from your cabin, she continued. Anything specific you need tonight? Michael considered this. My journal, and maybe the book on horse. Behavior from the ranch library, the one by that Monty Roberts guy. Elena nodded, making a mental note. I'll see to it. And Michael, her voice softened. What you did today, the choice you made to help them, it was the right one. Whatever happens next, remember that. After Eleanor left, Michael settled onto the ground beside the foal, his back against a sturdy equipment case. Dr. Littlefield and her assistants continued their work around the mare, checking vital signs and adjusting medication levels. The rhythmic beeping of monitoring equipment created a strangely soothing background to their vigil. As twilight deepened outside the tent, one of the preserve rangers brought a military-style cot, a sleeping bag, and a small battery-powered lantern, setting them up in the corner furthest from the ongoing medical activities. Another delivered a duffel containing Michael's requested items, along with a change of clothes and basic toiletries. There's a portable shower behind the second tent, the ranger informed him. Not much for hot water, but it'll do the job. And we've got a food station set up near the command vehicle whenever you're hungry. Michael thanked them, though he had no intention of leaving the tent anytime soon. The foal had finally succumbed to exhaustion, his head drooping until his muzzle rested on the tarp near his mother's neck. Even in sleep, his body maintained contact with Michael's leg, as if ensuring his newfound protector couldn't disappear. As night fell completely, Dr. Littlefield reduced the lighting in the tent to a minimum, creating a cocoon of dim warmth against the desert night. She checked the mare's vitals one final time, made notes on her chart, and turned to Michael. Try to get some rest, she advised. I'll be in the monitoring tent next door, and my assistant will remain here throughout the night. Any change in her condition, and you'll be woken immediately. Michael nodded, though he doubted sleep would come easily. His mind was too full of the day's events, racing with questions and possibilities. What twist of nature or instinct had led a wild mare to trust her foal to a human stranger? What responsibility did that trust place on him now? And if the mare didn't survive, what then? He opened his journal, flipping past pages filled with therapy exercises and reflections on his PTSD symptoms. Finding a blank page, he began to write by the soft glow of the lantern. The act of recording the day's extraordinary events helped organize his thoughts, transforming chaos into narrative. Somewhere in the midst of this process, exhaustion overtook him. The pen slipped from his fingers, and his head nodded forward. For the first time in years, Michael fell into sleep without the customary struggle against memories and nightmares. Instead, his dreams were filled with open spaces, running horses, and a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for too long. He woke with a start several hours later, briefly disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The medical tent was hushed. The only sounds, the quiet beeping of equipment, and the soft breathing of the mare. The foal had shifted position in the night and now lay curled against Michael's side, his slender neck stretched across Michael's lap in complete abandonment of the natural wariness wild horses typically displayed toward humans. The trust implied by this posture brought a lump to Michael's throat. Looking at the sleeping foal, he made a silent promise to the young horse, to his injured mother, and perhaps to himself as well. Whatever happened next, he would not betray the trust that had been placed in him on that sunlit spring bank. Some bonds once formed transcended the usual boundaries between species, between wild and tame, between broken and whole. As if sensing his thoughts, the foal's eyes opened, dark and liquid in the dim light. He lifted his head, regarding Michael with what seemed like quiet assessment, before turning to look at his mother. The mare's breathing seemed steadier now, her massive sides rising and falling in a more natural rhythm. Whether it was the medical intervention or some innate resilience, she appeared to be holding her own against the injuries that threatened her life. Hope, cautious but real, stirred in Michael's chest. Sometimes, against all odds, the broken could be mended. He had seen it in his fellow veterans at Horizon's edge. Perhaps he would witness it here too, in this unlikely sanctuary where the wild and the wounded had found common ground. Morning arrived with the gentle glow of desert sunrise filtering through the tent canvas. Michael stirred, his body stiff from sleeping upright against the equipment case. The foal no longer lay across his lap, but stood near his mother's head, gently nuzzling her face. The mare's eyes were open now, alert and aware in a way they hadn't been the previous evening. Dr. Littlefield was already present, checking the mare's vital signs with quiet efficiency. She glanced up as Michael rose, a cautious smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "She made it through the night," the veterinarian announced, "and her vitals are stabilizing. I'm actually quite surprised. Horses with this degree of trauma often don't rally so quickly. She's got a remarkable will to live." Michael approached slowly, careful not to startle either horse. The mare watched him with those intelligent eyes, her gaze no longer clouded by sedation. There was wariness there, certainly, but not the blind panic one might expect from a wild animal surrounded by human sense and equipment. "Has she eaten?" Michael asked. "Not yet. We've got fresh alfalfa ready, but she's been reluctant to take it from my assistants. Perhaps..." Dr. Littlefield hesitated, then continued. "Perhaps she might accept it from you. She seems to associate you with her foal's safety." Michael nodded, accepting a small flake of hay from one of the assistants. He approached the mare's head slowly, holding the offering where she could easily reach it without straining. For a long moment she simply regarded him, nostrils flaring slightly as she processed his scent. Then, with deliberate movement, she stretched her neck and took a small mouthful of the hay. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the medical team. A horse that would eat was a horse with a chance at recovery. That's the first real positive sign, Dr. Littlefield said quietly. Now we need to get some food into the foal as well. He's refused the milk replacer we offered last night. Michael looked at the gangly young horse, noting how he stayed pressed against his mother's side, drawing comfort from her presence. What about letting him nurse? Is she strong enough for that? The veterinarian considered this, her expression thoughtful. It's worth trying. The physical connection might benefit them both psychologically, and her milk production should still be intact despite the trauma. We'll need to help him position correctly to avoid putting pressure on her injuries. With gentle guidance from Michael and under the watchful supervision of Dr. Littlefield, they helped the foal find his way to his mother's teat. After a moment of confusion, instinct took over, and the young horse began to nurse eagerly. The mare's eyes half closed in what appeared to be relief, one ear cocked toward her foal, the other toward Michael, as if keeping tabs on both simultaneously. I'd say that's a major victory, Dr. Littlefield said with satisfaction. Now, while they're occupied, let's talk about next steps. I've been in contact with the preserve's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. They're preparing a special recovery stall for the mare with a connected enclosure for the foal. We can transport them there later today, once we're confident she's stable enough for the journey. And the prognosis? Michael asked, his voice low to avoid disturbing the nursing foal. Dr. Littlefield's expression grew more guarded. The internal bleeding has stopped, which is excellent news. But the leg, she sighed. It's a complex fracture. With a domestic horse, we'd likely perform surgery, insert plates and screws. But with a wild Mustang, that level of post-operative care is nearly impossible. They simply don't tolerate the restricted movement and handling. So what does that mean for her? Best case scenario? The leg heals enough that she can bear weight on it, but she'll likely always have a pronounced limp. She won't be able to keep up with a wild band or outrun predators. The veterinarian's words were gentle, but unflinching in their honesty. That means she can't be released back into the preserve. The implications settled heavily on Michael's shoulders. A wild horse that couldn't return to the wild, it seemed a cruel fate for such a magnificent creature. And yet the alternative, euthanasia, was unthinkable after she had fought so hard to survive. What are the options then? He asked. There are several Mustang sanctuaries that might take them both, Dr. Littlefield explained. Places where she could live out her life in a protected environment with her foal beside her. The preserve has relationships with several reputable facilities, but integration into an existing herd would be challenging for an injured mare. Elena entered the tent then, carrying a tray with coffee and what smelled like Rosa's homemade breakfast burritos. She had clearly been briefed on the mare's improved condition, as her face bore a cautious optimism that mirrored Michael's own. Feelings? I thought you might be hungry, she said, setting the tray on a small folding table. And I wanted to check in. How are you holding up? Michael accepted the coffee gratefully, realizing he hadn't eaten since the half-finished sandwich. At the spring the day before. I'm okay. Better than expected, actually. And it was true. The familiar weight of anxiety and hypervigilance that had been his constant companion since Afghanistan seemed somehow lighter this morning. Elena studied him with professional interest. Dr. Bennett would probably have a field day analyzing the therapeutic implications of all this. A veteran with trust issues being chosen by a wild animal to protect her most vulnerable offspring. It's rather poetic. Michael hadn't considered that perspective, but he couldn't deny the strange resonance. His time in combat had left him wary of connection, hyper-alert to threat, quick to perceive danger, all traits that had served him well in protecting the foal. Perhaps the mare had somehow sensed that in him, one survivor recognizing another. I've been thinking, he said slowly, the idea forming even as he spoke, about what happens next. for them. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, a gesture that indicated she was listening without judgment. It was one of the things he appreciated most about her as a therapist, her ability to create space for his thoughts without rushing to shape or interpret them. "The mare trusted me with her foal," Michael continued, "and now it turns out she can't go back to the wild. Neither of them can, really. The foal's too bonded to humans now, and she's too injured." "What are you suggesting?" Elena asked, though. The spark in her eyes suggested she might already have guessed. "Horizon's Edge already has therapy horses. The ranch is on the preserve's border. What if—" He paused, suddenly uncertain about voicing the idea that had been forming in his mind since dawn. What if they could stay there? Not as therapy horses. Exactly, at least not in the traditional sense, but as, I don't know, symbols of what it means to heal, to trust again. Eleanor's expression was thoughtful. "It's not entirely without precedent. The ranch has taken in rescue horses before, but a wild Mustang with a foal and one with medical needs, that's a significant commitment." "I'd take responsibility for them," Michael said, the conviction in his voice surprising even himself. "I have 4 months left in my program. By then, the foal would be weaned, and I could assess whether staying on at the ranch in some capacity might be possible." Dr. Littlefield, who had been listening quietly to their exchange, joined the conversation. "From a medical perspective, a stable environment where she could receive consistent care would be ideal for the mare, and keeping them together would certainly be best for the foal's development." "I'd need to discuss it with Dr. Bennett and the board," Elena cautioned. "There are logistical considerations, funding issues, but—" She smiled slightly. "I have to admit there's a certain symmetry to the idea. A healing place for healing creatures." The discussion was interrupted by a commotion outside the tent, raised voices, the crunch of vehicle tires on gravel, doors slamming. The mare's head came up sharply, her ears pricked toward the sounds. The foal, sensing his mother's tension, stopped nursing and pressed closer to her side. One of the preserve rangers burst into the tent, her face flushed with anger. "We've got a situation. News crews just showed up at the perimeter. Someone leaked information about the mare and foal rescue. They're calling it the Miracle at Wolf. Greek and demanding interviews. There's even a helicopter from a Denver TV station circling the area." Michael felt a surge of protective anger. The last thing these traumatized animals needed was the stress of camera crews and hovering aircraft. "How did they find out?" he demanded. The ranger's expression was grim. "One of the arrested poachers apparently has a brother who works for a local newspaper. He made a call from the station before we processed him. The story's gone viral. Wild horse entrusting her baby to a human veteran is apparently ratings gold." Elena's eyes narrowed with determination. "The ranch has a strict media exclusion zone for the privacy of our veterans. If we're considering relocating the horses there, we can extend that protection to them as well. We need to move them sooner rather than later," Dr. Littlefield decided. "The mare is stable enough for transport, and this environment is about to become far too stressful. I'll make the arrangements for immediate transfer to the rehabilitation center." "Or directly to Horizon's Edge," Elena suggested. "If Dr. Bennett approves my call, we could bypass the rehabilitation center entirely. The ranch has excellent facilities, and we could set up a suitable recovery space in the back pasture area, away from the main activity centers." While the logistics were being discussed, Michael moved to the mare's head, stroking her neck gently and speaking in low, soothing tones. She was clearly agitated by the increased activity and unfamiliar sounds, her eyes rolling to show the whites, nostrils flared. "It's okay," he murmured. "I'm not going to let anything happen to either of you. You trusted me, and I'm keeping that trust." Whether it was his voice or his touch, something calmed her. Her breathing slowed, and her focus shifted from the tent entrance back to Michael's face. The foal, taking cues from his mother, also relaxed slightly, though he maintained his vigilant posture beside her. Within the hour, Elena returned with news. Dr. Bennett had given provisional approval for the mare and foal to be transferred to Horizon's Edge, pending a formal board decision on their permanent status. The ranch's maintenance team was already converting a section of the rear pasture into a suitable recovery area, complete with shelter and appropriate fencing. The more pressing challenge was how to transport them. The mare could not walk the distance, and loading a wild, injured Mustang into a traditional horse trailer seemed both impractical and potentially dangerous for her healing leg. The preserve has a specialized wildlife transport vehicle, the ranger suggested. It's essentially a mobile stall with padded walls and a hydraulic ramp for loading injured animals. We use it for emergency relocations during wildfires. Dr. Littlefield nodded her approval. That could work. We'd need to sedate her lightly for the transfer, not enough to make her unsteady, just enough to take the edge off her fear. The foal will be trickier. He won't understand what's happening, and separating them would cause undue stress. I'll go with them, Michael said immediately. He trusts me. If I'm there, he might stay calm enough for the journey. The plan came together, with the efficiency of a military operation. While Michael stayed with the horses, keeping them as calm as possible, given the increasing commotion outside, the others prepared for the transfer. The wildlife transport vehicle was positioned as close to the medical tent as possible. A path was cleared, and privacy screens were erected to shield the operation from the distant lenses of news cameras. The mare accepted the mild sedative without resistance, another sign of her extraordinary trust in the humans caring for her. As the medication took effect, her eyes grew softer, less alarmed by the activity around her. The foal, however, grew increasingly agitated as strangers entered the tent with equipment and unfamiliar smells. "Let me try something," Michael said, removing his outer shirt, a well-worn flannel that carried his scent strongly. With slow, deliberate movements, he draped it over the foal's back and withers, creating a kind of makeshift blanket. The young horse flinched initially, then settled, seemingly comforted by the familiar smell enveloping him. "Clever," Dr. Littlefield approved. "Scent is their strongest sense. You're essentially creating a portable safe space for him." When the time came to move the mare, 4 preserve staff members carefully lifted the tarp on which she lay, creating a makeshift stretcher. With practiced coordination, they carried her from the tent to the waiting transport vehicle, up the hydraulic ramp, and into the padded stall. Throughout the process, Michael walked alongside, one hand on the foal's neck, guiding him to follow his mother. Despite his fear, the young horse stayed close to Michael, his trust in this human apparently outweighing his instinctive flight response. Once inside the vehicle, the foal pressed close to his mother, seeking reassurance in her familiar presence. "I'll ride in the back with them," Michael told Eleanor, who had been overseeing the operation with calm authority. She nodded, unsurprised by his decision. "I'll follow in my car. The media won't have access to the ranch property, but they'll likely try to track the vehicle. We'll take the Forest Service road. It's longer but more private." As the transport vehicle's doors closed, sealing Michael in the dim interior with the horses, a strange sense of rightness settled over him. The circumstances were extraordinary, the future uncertain, but in this moment, his path seemed clear. These wounded creatures had placed their trust in him, and in doing so, had given him something he had lost in the dust and violence of Afghanistan. A purpose beyond survival, a connection that transcended words. The vehicle began to move, its specialized suspension absorbing most of the bumps and jolts of the uneven preserve roads. The mare lay quietly on her cushioned bed, her eyes half closed as the sedative kept her calm. The foal stood braced against the gentle motion, Michael's flannel still draped across his back, his slender body pressed against Michael's leg. "We're going home," Michael told them softly, one hand resting on the foal's warm neck, the other gently stroking the mare's forelock. "All of us." And in that quiet promise was the recognition of a truth he had been running from since his medical discharge. Healing wasn't about escaping the past or even merely surviving it. It was about finding new connections, new purpose, about rebuilding what had been broken into something different but equally valuable. As the transport vehicle wound its way toward Horizon's edge, Michael felt the weight of the past lift just a fraction more. The road ahead would not be easy for any of them, wounded veteran, injured mare, orphaned foal, but they would travel it together, each lending strength to the others in the places where they were weakest. Sometimes, he reflected, the most unexpected encounters could chart an entirely new course. And sometimes, in the act of saving another, you discovered the path to saving yourself. The arrival at Horizon's Edge Ranch happened without the media fanfare that Michael had feared. Elena's choice of the Forest Service road had successfully evaded the news crews, and the ranch's private security team ensured that no unauthorized vehicles made it past the main gates. As the transport pulled into the rear service area, Michael could see that preparations had been made with impressive speed. A spacious paddock had been sectioned off from the main therapy pastures, bordered by sturdy wooden fencing rather than the wire typically used for domestic horses. Wild Mustangs were known to injure themselves on less substantial barriers. Within the enclosure stood a three-sided shelter, open at the front, but providing protection from sun and wind. Fresh straw bedding covered the ground inside, and water troughs had been installed at a height accessible to both the mare and her foal. Dr. Bennett himself was waiting as the transport vehicle came to a stop. The ranch's director was a tall, lean man in his 60s with silver hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. His background as both a combat veteran and a psychiatrist specializing in trauma made him uniquely qualified to run the rehabilitation program, and Michael had developed a deep respect for the man's quiet wisdom. "Quite the adventure you've had," Dr. Bennett remarked as Michael emerged from the transport vehicle. His tone was neutral, but Michael caught the assessment in his gaze, the professional evaluation of how this unexpected situation might affect a patient still working through significant trauma. "It's been transformative," Michael admitted. "I can't really explain it, but something important happened out there." Dr. Bennett nodded. "Elena briefed me. It sounds like an extraordinary encounter." He glanced toward the transport vehicle, where the veterinary team was preparing to unload the sedated mare. "She also tells me you've developed some ideas about these horses' future." Michael braced himself for resistance, but Dr. Bennett's expression remained open. "I know it's unconventional," Michael began, "but this mare trusted me with her foal. She chose a human, chose me when she was in danger. That kind of trust. It deserves to be honored. And you believe bringing them here is the best way to honor it?" "She can't go back to the wild," Michael explained. "The leg injury is too severe. The foal has bonded with humans, with me specifically. Separating them would be traumatic for both, and the specialized care she'll need. The ranch already has the infrastructure for horses, the staff with experience." Dr. Bennett considered this, his gaze thoughtful. "In my 30 years of working with veterans, I've learned that healing often comes from unexpected sources. The conventional wisdom in trauma treatment is valuable, but sometimes," he smiled slightly, "sometimes the universe delivers precisely what a wounded soul needs in the most unusual packaging." Before Michael could respond, activity around the transport vehicle intensified. Dr. Littlefield emerged, gesturing for the prepared team to approach with a specialized horse stretcher. "We're ready to move her," she called. The sedation is at optimal level, but we need to work quickly. The next hour passed in a blur of careful coordination. The mare was transferred from the vehicle to the prepared shelter, settled onto thick bedding that would provide comfort while supporting her injured leg. The foal, still wearing Michael's flannel shirt across his back, followed nervously, guided by Michael's steady presence. Once inside the shelter, the young horse immediately pressed close to his mother, seeking reassurance that she was still with him despite the strange surroundings. Dr. Littlefield supervised the installation of IV, lines for continued medication and fluids, then performed a thorough examination of the mare's injured leg. Her expression was more optimistic than it had been at the field station. "The transport went better than I expected," she told Michael. "No significant increase in swelling, and her vitals remained stable throughout. I think we can cautiously upgrade her prognosis to guardedly optimistic." The ranch's regular veterinarian, Dr. Abrams, had joined them, familiarizing himself with the mare's condition and treatment plan. "We can arrange for portable X-ray equipment tomorrow," he offered. "Get a clearer picture of how the fracture is setting. I've had some success with specialized bracing for similar injuries in domestic horses." As the two veterinarians discussed technical aspects of the mare's care, Michael found himself watching the foal, who had finally settled beside his mother. The young horse's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, his head drooping as the stress and fear of the past 24 hours caught up with him. Yet even in his fatigue, he maintained contact with both his mother and Michael, one pressed against his side, the other within touching distance. Dr. Bennett approached quietly, observing the scene with clinical interest. "Have you given them names?" he asked. The question caught Michael off guard. He hadn't thought about names, still thinking of them simply as the mare and the foal. Naming them seemed to cross some invisible line, to officially acknowledge that they had become more than wild animals temporarily in human care. It made their presence in his life feel permanent. "Not yet," he admitted. "It didn't seem, I don't know, appropriate somehow. They're wild animals." "Were wild animals," Dr. Bennett corrected gently. "Their circumstances have changed irrevocably, and names have power. They acknowledge relationship, connection. In many therapeutic contexts, naming is part of the process of integration, of accepting a new reality." Michael considered this, looking at the mare's strong profile, her determination to survive despite her injuries, and beside her, the foal, who had shown such remarkable trust in a human stranger. They deserved identities that honored their journey, their courage. "Liberty," he said suddenly, the name emerging from some deep place within him. "The mare's name is Liberty, because even if she can't run free anymore, she made a choice, exercised her freedom to trust a human when instinct would have told her not to." Dr. Bennett nodded, appreciation in his eyes. "And the foal?" Michael watched the young horse, his dark coat gleaming in the late afternoon sun, filtering through the shelter's open side. Despite his youth and the trauma he had experienced, there was a resilience in his bearing, a quiet strength that reminded Michael of comrades who had faced impossible odds with dignity. "Valor," he decided. "His name is Valor." "Liberty and valor," Dr. Bennett repeated, satisfaction evident in his tone. Fitting choices for this particular sanctuary. The naming seemed to seal something, to make concrete what had until now felt dreamlike and temporary. These creatures were now part of Michael's journey, just as he was part of theirs. The realization settled in him with unexpected comfort, like the weight of a promise that anchored rather than burdened. As evening approached, the immediate medical crisis stabilized. Liberty rested comfortably on her bed of straw, the worst of her pain, managed by carefully calibrated medication. Valor had finally surrendered to exhaustion, lying curled against his mother's side, his slender legs tucked beneath him. Michael sat nearby, reluctant to leave them, even though he knew competent staff would monitor them throughout the night. Elena found him there as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. She carried a thermos that steamed in the cooling air and a folder tucked under her arm. "Hot soup courtesy of Rosa," she said, offering the thermos. "She says you need proper nutrition after your wild adventure, and she's prepared your cabin for when you're ready to rest." Michael accepted the thermos gratefully, only now realizing how hungry he was. The rich scent of Rosa's famous vegetable beef soup triggered a rumble from his stomach that made Elena smile. "What's in the folder?" he asked between spoonfuls. Elena glanced down at the paperwork she carried. "The preliminary agreement from the board. Dr. Bennett fast-tracked it after seeing you with them." She handed him the folder. "It's a special designation for liberty and valor, not therapy horses in the traditional sense, but resident Mustangs with protected status at the ranch. And this..." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "This outlines a potential position for you after your program ends, if you're interested." Michael set aside the soup to examine the documents with his full attention. The first several pages detailed the arrangements for the horses, their care requirements, the funding allocated for their special needs, the protected status that would ensure they remained together at Horizon's edge, regardless of changes in administration or programming. The final pages described a new role at the ranch: Wilderness Program Specialist. The position would involve developing and leading excursions for veterans similar to the solo hike that had led to Michael's encounter with liberty and valor, as well as serving as primary caretaker for the resident Mustangs and liaison between the ranch and the wildlife preserve. "Dr. Bennett created this for me?" Michael asked, his voice rough with unexpected emotion. Elena nodded. "He said your experience with the Mustangs revealed natural abilities that the ranch has been missing in its program structure. The connection you formed with liberty and valor in a crisis situation demonstrated exceptional instincts for both wildlife management and therapeutic support." She smiled. In his words, some people spend years in training to develop the skills that seem to come naturally to Harrington. We'd be fools not to offer him a place here. Michael looked back toward the shelter where liberty and valor rested. Just 24 hours ago, he had been a patient focused solely on his own recovery, uncertain of his place in the civilian world. Now a new path was unfolding before him, one that wove together his military training, his healing journey, and this unexpected connection with two wild creatures who had chosen to trust him against all natural instinct. "It feels right," he said simply. "All of it." Elena followed his gaze to the sleeping horses. The indigenous peoples who originally inhabited this land believed that animals sometimes chose humans, not the other way around. That when an animal singled out a person, it was for a purpose, a teaching, a healing, a path forward. She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Maybe there's wisdom in that belief." After Elena left, Michael remained with liberty and valor as night fell completely over the ranch. The shelter's interior was softly illuminated by a single battery-powered lantern, casting a gentle glow over the sleeping horses. He had been assured that the night staff would check on them hourly, that monitoring equipment would alert the veterinary team to any changes in Liberty's condition, that he could and should return to his cabin for proper rest. Yet something kept him there, seated on a hay bale near the entrance, watching over these creatures who had so unexpectedly altered the course of his life. In the quiet darkness, with only the sounds of the horses breathing and the distant calls of night birds, Michael found himself reflecting on the strange currents of fate that had brought them together. His decision to come to Horizon's edge had been born of desperation, a last resort when civilian life had become unbearable, and the weight of his combat experiences had threatened to crush him. The solo hike that morning had been a milestone in his treatment, a test of his readiness to function independently despite the hypervigilance and anxiety that had plagued him since Afghanistan. And then Liberty had appeared at the spring, her foal beside her, and in a moment of extraordinary trust had placed her most precious possession in his care. Had she somehow sensed in him a kindred spirit, another wounded warrior fighting to survive in a world that had become suddenly hostile? Or had it simply been blind instinct, a desperate mother making an impossible choice in the face of danger? The reasons didn't matter, Michael realized. What mattered was that in that crucial moment he had been given an unexpected gift, the chance to protect rather than destroy, to save rather than survive, to connect rather than withdraw. In trying to save Liberty and Valor, he had stumbled upon a path towards saving himself. Valor stirred in his sleep, his slender legs twitching as he dreamed of running, perhaps, of the wide-open spaces that were his birthright. Liberty's ear flicked toward the sound, maternal vigilance operating even in her sedated state. Michael watched them, these proud wild creatures now dependent on human care, and felt the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, medical procedures for Liberty, orientation for Valor. To his new surroundings, the inevitable attention from other residents and staff curious about the ranch's newest inhabitants. There would be paperwork to complete for the position Elena had presented, decisions to make about the future, bridges to build between his past and what lay ahead. But tonight, in the peaceful darkness of the shelter, Michael simply allowed himself to be present with these creatures who had trusted him when trust seemed impossible. For the first time since returning from combat, the hypervigilance that had kept him continuously on edge felt not like a burden, but like a gift. A finely honed awareness that had allowed him to recognize Liberty's distress, to protect Valor from danger, to forge a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild. As midnight approached, Michael finally rose to return to his cabin, confident that Liberty and Valor were stable enough for him to seek his own rest. At the shelter entrance, he paused for one last look at the sleeping horses. In that moment, Liberty's eyes opened, her gaze finding him unerringly in the dim light. There was recognition there, and something more. A quiet acknowledgement of the bond that now existed between them. "I'll be back at dawn," Michael promised softly. "Rest now. You're safe." The mare's eyes closed once more, a sigh escaping her powerful frame as she settled deeper into her bedding. Michael stepped out into the cool desert night, the star-filled sky stretching endlessly above him. Each step toward his cabin felt like a step toward a future he hadn't imagined possible just days before. A future where his wounds and scars served a purpose, where his broken places became foundations for something new. Sometimes, he reflected, the most profound healing came not from escaping our pain, but from finding meaning within it. Liberty had transformed her vulnerability into an act of trust that saved her foal. Perhaps he could transform his own trauma into something equally powerful, a capacity to connect with others who were wounded, to guide them toward their own moments of healing and trust. As Michael reached his cabin door, he realized he was smiling, a genuine expression that felt foreign on his face after so many months of guarded neutrality. Whatever challenges lay ahead for Liberty, Valor, and himself, they would face them together. Survivors who had found in each other the courage to begin again. The weeks that followed brought both challenges and triumphs as Liberty, Valor, and Michael settled into their new reality. Dawn found Michael at the paddock each morning, often arriving before the first ranch staff began their daily routines. He would sit quietly with the horses as they woke, observing the subtle changes in Liberty's condition and Valor's growing confidence in his unfamiliar surroundings. Liberty's recovery progressed with agonizing slowness. The fracture in her foreleg proved even more complex than initially assessed, requiring 2 surgical interventions by a specialist equine orthopedist who flew in from Colorado State University's veterinary program. Each procedure left the proud mare sedated and disoriented, dependent on human care in ways that clearly chafed against her wild nature. Yet through it all, her trust in Michael remained unshaken. She would tolerate medical procedures when he stood at her head, his hands steady on her halter, his voice a constant reassurance in her ear. The veterinary staff marveled at her cooperation, noting that wild Mustangs typically required much heavier sedation for even basic treatments. "She shouldn't be this calm," Dr. Abrams remarked after successfully changing Liberty's leg dressing. "With minimal restraint, domestic horses with years of human handling fight us harder than she does when you're present." Michael had no explanation for the phenomenon, only a deep gratitude for the mare's continued trust. That trust was tested most severely during the second surgery, when complications led to a harrowing night of touch-and-go monitoring, Liberty's vital signs fluctuating dangerously as her body struggled to cope with the trauma. Michael had remained at her side for 36 hours straight, sleeping in brief snatches on the straw beside her, refusing to leave even when Eleanor gently suggested he needed proper rest. "I made her a promise," he had explained simply. "I'm not breaking it now." By morning, Liberty had stabilized, her remarkable will to live once again defying veterinary expectations. Dr. Littlefield, who had returned to check on her special patient, had simply shaken her head in wonder. "Some animals just refuse to give up," she'd said, "and some connections transcend explanation." While Liberty's recovery was the primary focus of the medical team, Valor presented his own unique challenges. The young colt, now fully imprinted on Michael, showed increasing curiosity about his surroundings as his initial fear subsided. This curiosity, combined with the boundless energy of a young horse, required constant supervision to prevent him from injuring himself or disturbing his mother's recovery. Michael found himself delving deep into the ranch library's resources, on wild horse behavior and foal development, consulting with equine specialists and developing innovative ways to provide Valor with appropriate stimulation while respecting his mother's need for quiet healing. Under Dr. Bennett's guidance, he incorporated elements of the ranch's equine therapy program, adapting techniques designed for troubled veterans to engage the young colt's mind and body. The other veterans at Horizon's Edge watched this developing relationship with a mixture of curiosity, envy, and respect. Initially, there had been some resentment. Michael's special status and responsibilities set him apart from the regular program participants. But as weeks passed, the therapeutic potential of Liberty and Valor's presence became increasingly apparent. Dr. Bennett began bringing small groups of veterans to observe the Mustangs from a respectful distance. For many, watching the wild mares struggle to heal from catastrophic injury mirrored their own battles with physical and psychological wounds. Her fierce protection of her foal, despite her limitations, resonated particularly with veterans who were parents, many of whom spoke of feeling inadequate in their family roles due to their trauma. And Valor, with his initial terror gradually transforming into cautious trust, provided a powerful metaphor for the program's core mission. Rehabilitation was not about erasing the wildness or the wounds, but about building bridges between past trauma and future possibility. 6 weeks after their arrival, at Horizon's Edge, Liberty took her first unassisted steps outside the shelter. The moment was both triumphant and heartbreaking. Her once graceful stride, now a halting, awkward movement, her injured leg bearing only partial weight. Yet the determination in her dark eyes as she made her way slowly into the sunlight brought tears to the eyes of staff members who had participated in her care. Valor pranced excitedly around his mother, seemingly understanding the significance of her achievement. Michael walked beside them, one hand hovering near Liberty's shoulder, ready to support her if necessary, but allowing her the dignity of this. Independent effort, a remarkable milestone, Dr. Bennett said, observing from the paddock fence. For all three of you, Michael nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in the psychiatrist's words. His own recovery had become inextricably linked with Liberty and Valor's journey. The responsibility of their care had given structure to days that had once stretched empty before him. The trust they placed in him had begun to rebuild his shattered confidence. The future that had seemed impossibly distant now took concrete form in his daily work with them and the evolving plans for his role at the ranch. News of the extraordinary bond between the veteran and the wild Mustangs spread beyond Horizon's Edge, despite the ranch's protective privacy policies. Research veterinarians requested permission to document Liberty's unusual recovery. Wildlife conservation groups expressed interest in the implications for Mustang rehabilitation protocols. A documentary filmmaker specializing in therapeutic animal-human connections made a formal proposal to tell their story. Dr. Bennett fielded these requests with diplomatic caution, consulting with Michael before responding to any of them. These horses are not research subjects or media fodder, he reminded all inquirers. They are living beings recovering from trauma, as is their caretaker. Any interaction must prioritize their well-being over external interests. Most were deterred by these strict conditions, but a few genuinely compassionate professionals were granted limited access. Among them was Dr. Miranda Hollingsworth, a leading ethologist specializing in wild equine behavior and cognition. Her gentle approach and genuine respect for Liberty and Valor's dignity earned Michael's trust, and her insights proved valuable as they navigated the challenges of rehabilitating wild horses in a domestic setting. What you're witnessing is extraordinarily rare, Dr. Hollingsworth explained, after observing Liberty and Valor's interactions with Michael. Wild Mustangs, particularly mares with foals, typically avoid human contact at all costs. The fact that she not only approached you but deliberately entrusted her foal to you suggests an unusual capacity for cross-species assessment and decision-making. You're saying she chose me specifically? Michael asked, the question that had haunted him since that first encounter at the spring finally voiced. Dr. Hollingsworth considered her answer carefully. Mustangs are prey animals with highly developed threat recognition systems. Their survival depends on accurately identifying danger and safety. Something in your presence, your behavior, or perhaps even your emotional state registered as safe to her in a moment of extreme danger. She smiled slightly. In essence, she looked at you and recognized something trustworthy when she desperately needed help. I wouldn't call it conscious choice in human terms, but it certainly transcends our traditional understanding of wild animal behavior. This conversation stayed with Michael, weaving into his ongoing therapy sessions with Eleanor, who had thoughtfully integrated his new responsibilities into his treatment plan rather than viewing them as a diversion from it. You were hypervigilant that day at the spring, she noted during one session, a state that has caused you significant distress in civilian settings. Yet in that moment, your heightened awareness allowed you to recognize the mare's distress, assess the poachers as a threat, and respond effectively to an extraordinary situation. Michael considered this perspective. You're saying my PTSD symptoms were actually useful? I'm saying that the very adaptations that kept you alive in combat, your hyper-awareness, your rapid threat assessment, your decisive action under pressure, served a different purpose that day. Perhaps Liberty recognized those qualities as valuable for her foal's protection. Elena's expression was thoughtful. Many veterans struggle to find meaning in their combat experiences and the ways those experiences have changed them. You've found a context where those changes serve a purpose, aligned with your values. As autumn painted the Nevada landscape in subtle golds and russets, Liberty's physical therapy intensified. Michael worked with her daily, following protocols designed by equine rehabilitation specialists, but modified to accommodate her wild temperament. The exercises strengthened her injured leg while building her trust in handling, a delicate balance between respecting her inherent wildness and preparing her for a life that would necessarily include human intervention. Valor, now almost 4 months old, had blossomed into a spirited young colt. His coat gleamed with health, the result of proper nutrition and attentive care. While still deeply bonded to his mother, he had developed a playful confidence that delighted everyone who worked with him. Unlike Liberty, whose trust extended primarily to Michael and a select few staff members, Valor had adapted more fully to human presence, accepting gentle handling from several of the ranch's equine specialists. Dr. Bennett observed this development with professional interest. The timing of his imprinting exposure to humans was formative, he explained to Michael. Young enough to adapt, but old enough to have established a healthy primary bond with his mother. It's an unusual balance. He's neither fully wild nor fully domesticated, rather like the veterans we work with here, who must find their own balance between their military experiences and civilian life. The parallels between the horse's rehabilitation and the veteran's recovery became increasingly apparent as Dr. Bennett cautiously integrated Liberty and Valor into the ranch's therapeutic program. Small groups of program participants were invited to observe Michael's work with the Mustangs and eventually, under careful supervision, to participate in simple care activities like preparing feed or maintaining the paddock. For many veterans, struggling with isolation and emotional numbing, witnessing Liberty's fierce maternal devotion, despite her injuries, provided a powerful reconnection to their own capacity for love and protection. For those battling feelings of uselessness or purposelessness in civilian life, contributing to the Mustang's care offered tangible evidence that they could still provide meaningful service. One Marine who had lost both legs to an IED found particular resonance with Liberty's determination to recover mobility despite her permanent impairment. "She doesn't waste energy being bitter about what she's lost," he remarked after watching her painstaking physical therapy. "She just focuses on what she can still do, on protecting her kid. There's a lesson there." As Michael's official program at Horizon's Edge approached its conclusion, Dr. Bennett arranged a formal meeting to discuss the transition to his new role. The proposed position had evolved over the weeks, shaped by Michael's demonstrated abilities and the unexpected therapeutic impact of Liberty and Valor's presence at the ranch. "The board has unanimously approved your appointment as our first Wilderness Connection specialist," Dr. Bennett announced, sliding a formal offer letter across his desk. "The position incorporates primary care responsibility for Liberty and Valor, development of our wilderness excursion program, and a formal role in our equine-assisted therapy sessions." Michael reviewed the document, gratitude and a sense of purpose washing over him. The salary was modest but sufficient, and the position included housing on the ranch property, a small cabin being renovated specifically for his needs, situated near Liberty and Valor's paddock. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Dr. Bennett smiled. "You've already said everything that matters through your actions these past months. You've honored a wild creature's extraordinary trust, and in doing so, found a path forward from your own trauma. Now, you'll help others find their way." That evening, as sunset bathed the paddock in golden light, Michael sat on the ground beside Liberty, who had settled into her evening rest. Valor grazed nearby, occasionally trotting over to check on his mother before returning to his exploration. Of the paddock perimeter, the simple domesticity of the scene belied the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. "We made it," Michael told Liberty softly, stroking her neck. Her ear flicked toward his voice, acknowledging his presence in that subtle way she had. "All three of us." The mare turned her head slightly, her dark eye regarding him with what he had come to recognize as her particular blend of wild dignity and hard-won trust. In that gaze was neither the blank compliance of a domestic animal nor the fearful wariness of a wild one, but something unique, a conscious choice to accept this altered life, to forge this unlikely bond. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Michael felt a sense of peace that had eluded him since his return from combat. The nightmares and flashbacks hadn't vanished entirely. Dr. Bennett had cautioned against expecting miraculous cures, but they had diminished in both frequency and intensity. More importantly, they no longer defined his existence or limited his future. Liberty shifted position, carefully adjusting her injured leg with the practiced caution of an animal adapting to permanent disability. Valor trotted over immediately, pressing his muzzle against his mother's face in a gesture of equine affection before settling beside her in the straw. Michael remained with them, part of their small family circle, yet respectful of the bond between mother and son that transcended their unusual circumstances. In the moment that Liberty had pushed her foal toward Michael and fixed him with that tear-filled gaze of desperate trust, she had given him far more than temporary responsibility for her offspring. She had offered him a bridge back to himself, to the man who existed beyond the trauma and hypervigilance, to a future where his wounds became wisdom and his pain found purpose. And in accepting that trust, in making the choice to protect rather than withdraw, Michael had not only saved two remarkable creatures, he had found his way home. 1 year after the fateful encounter at Wolf Creek Spring, Horizon's Edge Ranch hosted a small gathering to commemorate what the staff had come to call the Mustang Miracle. The event was private, limited to ranch personnel, current program participants, and a few carefully selected supporters who had contributed to Liberty and Valor's ongoing care. The paddock area had expanded considerably over the months, now encompassing a spacious 5-acre enclosure with varied terrain designed to provide both challenge and comfort for its special residents. A series of gentle slopes strengthened Liberty's healing leg, while shallow water features and scattered boulder formations created natural enrichment for the curious and energetic Valor, now approaching his first birthday. Michael stood at the paddock gate, watching with quiet pride as Liberty demonstrated her recovery for the assembled guests. Her gait would never be perfect. The orthopedic specialists had been clear about the permanent nature of some damage, but she moved with a fluid dignity that belied the severity of her original injury. The pronounced limp remained most noticeable when she was tired or when weather changes made the healed fracture ache, but her mobility had far exceeded even the most optimistic projections. "She's remarkable," Dr. Littlefield said, joining Michael at the fence. The preserve veterinarian had maintained her connection with Liberty and Valor, visiting monthly to document their progress and consult on their care. "I've worked with hundreds of injured wild animals, and I've never seen one adapt to captivity and rehabilitation with such resilience." "It's not just resilience," Michael replied, watching as Liberty paused to gently discipline Valor, who had been showing off with increasingly exuberant gallops around the perimeter. "It's choice. She's chosen to accept this life, to trust us. Every day she could retreat into wildness, into fear. Instead, she keeps choosing connection." Dr. Littlefield nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's the most extraordinary aspect of this whole situation. We tend to think of wild animals as purely instinctual creatures, but Liberty challenges those assumptions. There's an adaptability, a capacity for trust despite trauma that feels almost human," Michael suggested. "I was going to say transcendent." she corrected with a smile. Something that crosses the boundaries we typically draw between species. The gathering moved to the ranch's main patio for a catered lunch, where Dr. Bennett took the opportunity to update supporters on the expanding Wilderness Connection program that had grown from Michael's initial position. What had begun as a specialized role focused on liberty and valor's care had evolved into a comprehensive addition to the ranch's therapeutic offerings, employing 2 additional staff members and serving veterans from across the country. What Michael and these remarkable horses have shown us, Dr. Bennett explained to the assembled guests, is that healing often requires reconnection with something larger than ourselves. For many of our veterans, the structured world of military service provided clarity and purpose. Its absence can leave a void that traditional therapy alone struggles to fill. He gestured toward the paddock visible from the patio. Liberty and valor represent something profound. The wildness that cannot be fully tamed, the dignity that survives trauma, the trust that must be earned rather than demanded. In working with them, our veterans rediscover aspects of themselves that combat and its aftermath have buried. As the formal portion of the event concluded, Michael slipped away from the gathering, returning to the paddock with a small bag of Liberty's favorite treats, organic carrots from the ranch's garden. She approached him with the measured caution that still characterized her interactions with humans, but the wariness now contained recognition and even affection. "Happy anniversary," he told her softly, offering a carrot on his flattened palm. Her velvet lips tickled his skin as she delicately accepted the treat. "1 year since you trusted me with your most precious possession. 1 year since you changed everything." Valor trotted over, nudging Michael's shoulder with characteristic boldness. Unlike his mother, the young colt had embraced his unusual upbringing wholeheartedly, developing a playful confidence around humans that sometimes bordered on mischievous. Still, he maintained the distinctive alertness of his wild heritage, the sharp awareness, the quick reactions, the untamed intelligence that set him apart from domestic horses. Michael scratched Valor's favorite spot, just behind his ear, smiling as the colt leaned into the touch with a contented sigh. At nearly a year old, he was entering adolescence, his frame beginning to suggest the powerful stallion he would eventually become. Training him presented unique challenges, balancing respect for his wild nature with the necessary boundaries of his semi-domestic life. "You're looking philosophical," Eleanor observed, joining Michael at the fence. "Anniversaries tend to prompt reflection." Michael nodded, watching as Valor rejoined his mother, the 2 horses moving together with the synchronized awareness of a herd, even if that herd consisted of just 2 members. "I was thinking about parallel journeys. A year ago, Liberty was fighting for her life, Valor was traumatized and confused, and I was..." He paused, searching for the right words. "I was surviving, not living, going through the motions of recovery without really believing in it. And now," Elena prompted gently, "now we're all somewhere in between where we started and where we're headed. Liberty will never run wild again, but she's found a way to live with dignity despite her limitations. Valor straddles 2 worlds, wild by heritage, but comfortable with humans in a way his mother will never be." Michael turned to face his former therapist, now colleague. "And I've found purpose in what once felt like permanent damage. The hypervigilance that made civilian life unbearable helps me understand these horses, read their needs, anticipate their responses." Elena smiled. "That's the essence of post-traumatic growth, not erasing the wound, but finding meaning within it." She gestured toward the main buildings where the anniversary gathering continued. "That's what our new veterans see when they meet you and these horses. Not miracle cures, but the possibility of transformation." The Wilderness Connection program had indeed transformed over the past year, becoming one of Horizon's Edge's most distinctive and successful therapeutic offerings. Beyond Liberty and Valor's direct involvement, Michael had developed a progressive series of wilderness experiences that guided veterans from brief, supported nature walks to multi-day solo expeditions in the preserve. Each phase carefully balanced, challenge with support, helping participants recalibrate their hypervigilance from the life-threatening context of combat to the natural alertness needed in wilderness settings. For many, this shift became a crucial bridge between military and civilian mindsets, a space where their combat-honed awareness became an asset rather than a liability. We've had inquiries from 3 other veteran rehabilitation centers, Elena mentioned, consulting her phone for the latest updates. They want to implement similar programs. Dr. Bennett is considering developing a training certification. Michael raised an eyebrow. He wants to standardize something that happened through such unusual circumstances. Not standardize, Elena clarified. But there are elements of your approach that could be adapted, core principles that could guide others. No one expects them to find their own wild Mustang with a foal, of course. That would be a tall order. Michael agreed with a smile. Though I maintain that Liberty found me, not the other way around. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention back to the paddock. Liberty had begun her evening exercise routine, a series of movements designed by the equine physical therapists to maintain strength in her healing leg. She no longer needed guidance to complete these exercises, having incorporated them into her daily routine with characteristic intelligence. Valor, displaying his usual exuberance, had transformed the stately walking exercise into a game, racing ahead of his mother before circling back, encouraging her to increase her pace. Liberty maintained her dignified tempo, occasionally flicking an ear in what Michael had come to recognize as maternal exasperation. "They're so different," Eleanor observed. "Liberty still carries herself like a wild mare, despite everything. Valor seems to inhabit both worlds effortlessly. Different trauma, different timing," Michael explained. Liberty was fully formed when her world changed catastrophically. Valor was young enough to adapt without losing his essential nature. He glanced at Elena. "We see the same patterns in our veterans. Those who experience trauma later in their service often struggle more with reintegration than those who encountered it during basic training or first deployment." Elena nodded, her expression reflecting professional appreciation of the insight. "You're developing quite the theoretical framework from your observations. Dr. Bennett thinks you should consider publishing some of your findings in the Journal of Wilderness Therapy." Michael laughed softly. "From patient to published authority in 1 year, that seems like quite a leap. Not as much as you might think," Elena countered. "Lived experience combined with thoughtful analysis is precisely what the field needs. The academic perspective has value, but the view from within the journey offers insights no outside observer can provide." As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the paddock, Michael's phone chimed with a reminder. "The evening group session is starting soon," he noted. 6 new arrivals this week." Elena nodded. "I'll handle the introductions if you want." To finish up here, after she departed, Michael completed his evening check of the paddock facilities, water troughs, hay supplies, the special supplements prescribed for Liberty's continued recovery. Though the ranch employed capable staff who could easily handle these tasks, this personal involvement remained important to him, a daily renewal of the commitment he had made that day at the spring. When all was in order, he approached the horses one last time. Liberty stood near the shelter entrance, her posture relaxed yet attentive. Valor grazed nearby, occasionally glancing up to track Michael's movements with curious eyes. "I need to go help some people who are a bit lost," Michael told them, a habit of verbal communication he had maintained despite occasional good-natured teasing from his colleagues. "They're where I was before I met you, trying to find their way back from places that changed them." Liberty's ear flicked toward his, voice, her dark eye regarding him steadily. In the year of their unexpected partnership, Michael had learned to read the subtle languages of equine communication, the positioning of ears, the tension in muscles, the almost imperceptible shifts in posture that conveyed volumes to those attentive enough to notice. What he saw now was not merely tolerance or required comfort with human presence, but something he could only describe as recognition, one sentient being acknowledging another across the divide of species. There was no anthropomorphic fantasy in this assessment. He had learned through careful observation and expert guidance to distinguish between projection and genuine connection. "See you in the morning," he said simply, placing a hand briefly on Liberty's neck before turning toward the main compound where the new veterans waited. The evening session followed a format Michael had refined over months of working with traumatized veterans. The new arrivals, tense and wary in the unfamiliar environment, were introduced to the ranch's philosophy and programs without overwhelming detail or pressure for immediate participation. The focus remained on establishing safety and choice, the foundations upon which all effective trauma work must build. "Tomorrow, for those who are interested, we'll walk out to meet Liberty and Valor," Michael explained toward the session's end. "There's no obligation to participate, and there's value in simply observing from whatever distance feels comfortable." A former Army Ranger with the hyper-alert posture Michael recognized all too well spoke up, his tone revealing the customary skepticism of new arrivals. "With respect, sir, I don't see how watching horses is going to help with nightmares and flashbacks." Michael nodded, acknowledging the legitimate question without defensiveness. 6 months ago, I would have said the same thing. I can't promise specific outcomes for anyone. What I can offer is this. These horses have something to teach about living with injuries that don't heal completely, about finding new ways forward when old paths are blocked, about trusting after trauma has taught you to expect the worst. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Liberty, the mare you'll meet tomorrow, made a choice at her moment of greatest vulnerability. Surrounded by danger, injured and desperate, she could have retreated into wildness, into the fight or flight responses that had kept her alive. Instead, she reached across a divide toward an unlikely ally." The ranger's expression remained skeptical, but others in the group leaned forward slightly, engagement flickering across previously guarded faces. "I'm not suggesting some magical horse therapy will cure combat trauma," Michael continued. "What I am offering is the possibility that our responses to danger and hurt, the hypervigilance, the emotional numbing, the constant threat assessment, don't have to remain stuck in combat settings. Like Liberty, we can find ways to repurpose those responses to direct them toward protection rather than just survival, connection rather than isolation." After the session concluded, Michael walked to his cabin in the gathering dusk. The small structure, originally a temporary arrangement during his transition to staff, had become home over the past year. Its proximity to Liberty and Valor's paddock suited both practical care needs and his personal preference for quiet separation from the main compound. Inside, the simple space reflected the integration of his military past with his civilian present. His service medals and unit photographs shared wall space with framed images of Liberty and Valor's journey, and a hand-carved wooden sign made by a talented program graduate hung above the fireplace. Healing happens in the places between broken and whole. Before settling in for the night, Michael stepped onto his small porch for a final check on his charges. The moonlight illuminated the paddock with silver clarity, revealing Liberty and Valor standing together near the shelter entrance. The mare's head was raised, her senses clearly monitoring the night sounds of the preserve beyond the ranch boundaries. Valor stood close beside her, his young form echoing his mother's alertness. In that tableau of natural vigilance, neither hyper-aroused panic nor dull complacency, Michael recognized the balance he himself had found over the past year. The wounds remained for all three of them. Liberty would always carry the physical evidence of her encounter with human cruelty. Valor would never know the completely unfettered existence of a wild Mustang. And Michael's nervous system still bore the imprints of combat trauma that no therapy could entirely erase. Yet in their shared journey, from that desperate moment at the spring to this quiet night under Nevada stars, they had discovered something profound. That healing wasn't about returning to some mythical, unscarred state, but about finding meaningful connection despite and sometimes even through the very wounds that seemed to make connection impossible. Tomorrow, he would introduce a new group of wounded warriors to this living testament of resilience. Some would connect with the message immediately, others might take weeks or months, and a few might need to find their healing through different paths entirely. But the possibility would be there, embodied in two extraordinary horses and the man whose life they had transformed with one desperate act of trust. As if sensing his thoughts, Liberty turned her head toward Michael's cabin, her profile noble against the night sky. Valor, following his mother's attention, nickered softly. In acknowledgement, Michael raised his hand in a gentle salute to these unlikely teachers who had guided him from patient to healer, from isolation to purpose, from surviving to truly living once again. The following morning dawned clear and cool, the desert air crisp with autumn's approach. Michael rose before the sun, continuing the habit formed during his military years and reinforced by his responsibilities to liberty and valor. After a quick breakfast and strong coffee, he made his way to the paddock, boots crunching on the gravel path that connected his cabin to the horses' enclosure. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, he could see Liberty standing alert at the fence line, her ears pricked forward at the sound of his approach. Behind her, Valor lay sprawled in peaceful slumber, his growing frame taking up considerably more space than the gangly foal who had trembled against Michael's leg a year ago. The contrast between the mare's ever-vigilant nature and her son's casual confidence spoke volumes about their different experiences of the world. "Good morning," Michael called softly, his breath visible in the cool air. Liberty nickered in response, a quiet greeting that had developed over months of consistent interaction. She still maintained a respectful distance from most humans, but with Michael, she had established a cautious intimacy, allowing touches to her neck and shoulders, accepting treats from his hand, occasionally even pressing her forehead against his chest in a gesture that equine specialists suggested indicated profound trust. Today would mark an important milestone in their shared journey. For the first time, Liberty and Valor would be introduced to a full group of new program participants, rather than the carefully selected individuals or small gatherings that had characterized their previous therapeutic interactions. Dr. Bennett had been cautious about exposing the horses to potentially triggering situations, particularly given Liberty's history with human trauma. "Today's the big day," Michael told her, running a hand along her neck in the long, steady strokes she preferred. "Real work begins. Are you ready for that?" Liberty's dark eye regarded him steadily, her gaze containing the enigmatic intelligence that still sometimes caught Michael off guard despite their year together. In that moment, as so often happened in their quiet morning exchanges, he felt the boundary between species thin just slightly. Two beings who had experienced profound trauma, finding wordless understanding in each other's presence. He completed the morning care routine with practiced efficiency, fresh water, specialized feed for Liberty's ongoing nutritional needs, a quick check of the paddock for any safety concerns. By the time he finished, The sun had cleared the eastern mountains, painting the desert landscape in gold. Valor had awakened and joined his mother at the fence line, his characteristic impatience evident in the way he tossed his head and pawed at the ground. "Yes, I see you," Michael laughed, offering the young horse a treat. "Always the center of attention, aren't you?" At just over a year old, Valor had grown into a handsome young stallion, his black coat gleaming with health, the white star between his eyes standing out like a beacon. His dual nature remained evident in everything he did, the wild Mustang, heritage showing in his alertness and powerful movements, the human imprinting visible in his comfortable approach to people and his eagerness for interaction. Dr. Hollingsworth, during her last visit, had remarked that he represented something genuinely unique in equine behavior studies, neither fully wild nor fully domesticated, but a new category that challenged conventional classifications. The morning's planned activity would begin after breakfast, giving the new veterans time to settle into the day's routine before facing what might be an emotionally challenging experience. Michael used the intervening hours to prepare both the horses and the environment, ensuring everything was arranged to maximize safety and therapeutic potential. With the help of 2 ranch hands, he set up a semicircle of hay bales at a respectful distance from the paddock fence, creating natural seating that would allow the veterans to observe the horses without crowding them. Elena had prepared information packets on wild Mustang behavior and the specific history of liberty and valor, which Michael placed on each bale. Small coolers with water bottles and light snacks completed the setup, providing for the physical comfort that often helped facilitate emotional openness. By mid-morning, he could see the group approaching along the main path from the ranch buildings. Dr. Bennett led the way, with Elena bringing up the rear to ensure no one fell behind or became distressed without support. The 6 new veterans walked between them, their body language revealing varying degrees of tension and skepticism. Michael recognized the familiar signs of combat hypervigilance, the scanning gazes, the positioning that kept backs protected, the subtle distance maintained between individuals to allow for rapid movement if needed. A year ago, he had exhibited those same behaviors himself, his body perpetually braced for threats that existed only in memory. Now, though not entirely free of those patterns, he had learned to channel that heightened awareness into constructive purposes. As the group reached the seating area, Michael stepped forward to greet them. "Good morning," he said, keeping his voice calm and his movements deliberate. "I'm Michael Harrington, Wilderness Connection Specialist here at Horizon's Edge. Before we approach the paddock, I'd like to share a bit about the horses you're about to meet and why they're part of your program here." He could sense the skepticism from several members of the group, particularly the former ranger who had questioned the purpose of horse therapy the previous evening. But skepticism was a natural and healthy response in individuals whose trust had been shattered by combat experiences. Michael had learned not to take it personally or try to force acceptance prematurely. "Liberty and valor aren't therapy horses in the traditional sense," he explained, gesturing toward the paddock where both Mustangs now watched the gathering with alert interest. They weren't bred or trained for this work. They're wild Mustangs who encountered human cruelty, experienced profound trauma, and are now navigating a new kind of existence that bridges their wild nature and their connection with humans. He proceeded to share the story of the spring encounter, the desperate choice Liberty had made to entrust her foal to a human stranger, and the journey of recovery they had shared since. As he spoke, he noticed subtle shifts in the veterans' postures, a slight leaning forward, a softening around the eyes, the barely perceptible nodding that indicated resonance with elements of the narrative. "I'm not going to tell you what to. Learn from them," Michael concluded. Each of you will find your own connection or perhaps no connection at all, and either response is perfectly valid. What I will say is this: these horses have taught me that trauma doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a different one. Dr. Bennett stepped forward then, his calm authority complementing Michael's more personal approach. "Today is about observation only," he explained to the group. "There's no expectation of interaction or participation beyond being present. You're welcome to sit, stand, or position yourselves however feels most comfortable. The only guidelines are to avoid sudden movements or loud noises that might startle the horses." As the veterans settled onto the hay bales, Michael moved to open the interior gate that would allow Liberty and Valor access to the section of paddock closest to the observation area. He had worked with them extensively to prepare for this moment, gradually accustoming them to the presence of small groups at increasing proximity. Still, Liberty's welfare remained his primary concern, and he watched her body language carefully for any signs of distress. The mare approached the open gate with characteristic caution, her nostrils flared as she processed the scents of the strangers. Valor showed no such hesitation, trotting through immediately with the confident curiosity that characterized his approach to new experiences. Michael remained at the fence line, a reassuring presence for Liberty as she made her decision. After a long moment of assessment, the mare stepped gracefully through the gate, her movement still marked by the slight unevenness that remained her, permanent reminder of the trapper's brutality. Yet there was dignity in her careful stride, a hard-won poise that somehow transcended the injury itself. The veterans watched in silence as the horses moved about the paddock. Valor, true to form, approached the fence nearest the observers, his interest evident in the forward set of his ears and the alertness in his dark eyes. Liberty maintained a greater distance, grazing with apparent casualness while keeping the humans within her field of vision, a strategy Michael recognized from his own early days of recovery, when direct engagement had felt too overwhelming. "Notice how differently they respond to our presence," Elena prompted softly from her position at the edge of the group. "Same event, same trauma, different adaptations based on their unique experiences and temperaments." The former ranger, who had expressed skepticism the previous evening, leaned forward slightly, his attention fixed on Liberty. "Her leg," he said, his voice rougher than perhaps intended. "She adapts to the weakness, compensates." Michael nodded. "The orthopedic specialists say she'll always have that limp. The bone healed, but not perfectly. She's learned to distribute her weight differently, to use her other legs in ways that minimize strain on the injured one. But she still runs," another veteran observed, a woman whose service record included multiple deployments as a combat medic. "I saw her galloping when we walked up. Not as fast or smooth as the young one, but she still runs." "She does," Michael confirmed, "not with the same freedom she once had, but with a new kind of strength. She's adapted to limitations without surrendering to them." A contemplative silence followed this observation, each person seemingly absorbed in their own reflections on adaptation and resilience. Michael recognized this as a crucial therapeutic moment, the space where personal connection with Liberty and Valor's story might begin to form, where metaphor could bridge the gap between intellectual understanding and emotional integration. Dr. Bennett allowed the silence to extend, his experienced therapist's instinct recognizing its value. Only when the energy began to shift did he speak again. "We'll come back tomorrow and the next day," he told the group. "Each visit builds on the last. There's no rush, no prescribed timeline for how this relationship develops." As if understanding the session was concluding, Valor approached the bench directly across from the veterans. For a moment, he simply stood there, his gaze moving from person to person with unabashed interest. Then, in a gesture that brought a smile to Michael's face, the young horse extended his neck across the fence, offering a tentative invitation for contact. None of the veterans moved immediately, the caution of trauma creating a natural hesitation. Then slowly, the combat medic rose from her seat and approached the fence. Her movements were measured and deliberate, her expression a complex mixture of wariness and hope. Valor remained still, his body language relaxed and open in a way that spoke volumes about his unusual upbringing between wild and domestic worlds. "Can I touch him?" she asked, looking to Michael for guidance. "If you'd like to," he replied. "Hold your hand out flat, palm up, and let him make the final choice." She followed his instruction, extending her hand without pushing into the horse's space. For a long moment, Valor regarded the offered hand, his nostrils flaring slightly as he processed her scent. Then, with the gentle curiosity that characterized his nature, he lowered his muzzle to her palm. The contact lasted only seconds, but Michael could see its impact in the subtle softening of the veteran's face, the almost imperceptible release of tension in her shoulders. When she returned to her seat, something had shifted in her demeanor. Not dramatically, but noticeably to those trained to observe such changes. As the group prepared to return to the main compound, Michael noticed Liberty had moved closer, her attention seemingly focused on the ranger who had commented on her gait. She made no approach for contact, maintained her characteristic distance, but there was an undeniable quality of recognition in her stance, one survivor acknowledging another across the divide of species. The morning session concluded with Dr. Bennett outlining the day's remaining activities and Elena distributing the schedule for the following day's visit to the paddock. As the veterans departed, Michael remained behind to spend a few minutes with Liberty and Valor, assessing their responses to the new experience. "You both did wonderfully," he told them, offering treats as positive reinforcement. Valor accepted, his eagerly, while Liberty took hers with her usual gentle care. This is just the beginning. Later that afternoon, Michael met with the therapeutic team to review the session and plan adjustments for subsequent encounters. Elena had taken notes throughout the observation period, documenting both the horse's behaviors and the veterans' responses for later analysis. The impact was subtle but significant, Dr. Bennett assessed, particularly with Sergeant Rodriguez, the ranger. "Did you notice how his breathing pattern changed when he focused on Liberty's movement? Classic physiological downregulation. His body was responding to her calm strength even before his mind consciously connected with the metaphor." Elena nodded in agreement. "And Captain Lynn, the medic who approached Valor. Her affect shifted dramatically after that brief contact. When she returned to the main building, she voluntarily joined the art therapy session. First time she's engaged in any optional activity since arriving. The discussion continued, professional observations interwoven with plans for progressive engagement in future sessions. Michael contributed his insights about Liberty and Valor's responses, noting subtle behaviors that might have escaped even trained clinical eyes. This interdisciplinary approach had become the hallmark of the Wilderness Connection program, blending psychological expertise, equine knowledge, and lived experience of trauma recovery into an integrated therapeutic model. As evening approached, Michael returned to the paddock for final checks before nightfall. Liberty and Valor had settled into their usual routine, the day's unusual activities seemingly processed and integrated into their expanding understanding of their new life. Watching them move together across the paddock, communicate through subtle equine signals, and maintain their profound bond despite all they had endured, Michael felt a familiar surge of gratitude for what they had taught him about resilience and connection. The skeptical ranger, Rodriguez, was sitting alone on the main compound's porch when Michael walked back from the paddock. His posture remained vigilant, his eyes continuously scanning the perimeter in the habit formed during multiple combat deployments. Yet something in his expression had softened slightly since the morning session. "Evening, Sergeant," Michael greeted, Him, respecting the military identity that remained important to many veterans even after discharge. Rodriguez nodded in acknowledgement. After a moment's hesitation, he spoke. That mare, Liberty, the way she moves with that injury. It's like she's turned weakness into a different kind of strength. He paused, seemingly searching for words. I've been trying to hide my limp since I got back. 3 surgeries and it's still there. Been seeing it as failure. Michael sat on the porch step, giving the man space while offering presents. Liberty didn't have a choice about her injury, but she does have a choice about how she carries it. We all do. Rodriguez considered this, his gaze distant. She doesn't try to hide it, doesn't seem ashamed of it, just works with it, finds a new way to move. That's exactly right, Michael agreed. And every veteran who comes through here sees something different in her, just like every veteran finds their own path forward from trauma. 5 years after that fateful day at Wolf Creek Spring, Horizon's Edge Ranch had become internationally renowned for its innovative Wilderness Connection program. Hundreds of veterans had found healing through their encounters with Liberty and Valor, whose remarkable story had inspired similar programs nationwide. Liberty, though still bearing her limp, had matured into a dignified matriarch, her wisdom and resilience touching all who met her. Valor had grown into a magnificent stallion who helped younger veterans overcome their initial fears of connection. Michael, now the program's director following Dr. Bennett's retirement, often reflected on how one desperate mother's trust had transformed countless lives, including his own. The most profound healing, he often told new arrivals, comes from the connections we never expected to make. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more inspiring tales of healing, connection, and the remarkable bonds that can form between humans and animals when we open ourselves to trust.